Grab your favorite caffeinated beverage and get cozy because you are listening to Mindful as a Mother with Paige Bruce and Lindsay Adams. Hey, I just wanted to pop on here real quick before the episode starts and give a quick disclaimer. This podcast is not intended to be a substitute for therapy or the therapeutic relationship, and the information given in this podcast is purely for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the advice of a professional. Now that that's out of the way, I really hope you enjoy this episode. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review if you enjoy it because it helps the podcast grow. And don't forget to be peace, be love, be mindful as a mother.
Do you remember those toys from when we were kids where you would fit the different shaped pegs into the different shaped holes?
Yeah.
That's a lot like parenting, except when you have a neurodivergent child, using traditional parenting techniques is like trying to put the round peg in the star hole.
That's exactly how I felt when I discovered that Sam was neurodivergent. I knew that traditional parenting techniques and even the approaches that I was taught in grad school, they didn't feel right in my soul to like supporting who he was as a human. And they also just weren't effective. And that's when I discovered the power of responsive parenting.
Exactly. So if you are like us and are interested in tailoring responsive parenting techniques to your neurodivergent world, check out our Parenting Your Neurospicy video series. You can find it in our stand store at the link in the show notes.
Hello and welcome back to Mindful as a Mother. My name is Lindsay and I'm here with
Paige. Hello.
And today we are talking about radical acceptance.
I'm here for it. I want to know. I think this is a difficult concept to describe and explain, so I'm excited for the conversation.
Yes, and I think it applies to so many different areas of life and parenting that there's many different avenues that you can take radical acceptance. So today we're going to focus on like understanding what it is and how it can be applied in parenting your neurodivergent child. So first, what do you think radical acceptance is, Paige?
I think radical acceptance is accepting what's happening for you in the present moment without trying to change or control it.
Yes. And it actually became a thing because it's a mindfulness concept in a certain type of therapy, but I've seen it evolving and using in different ways, which I love. So it involves...
Wasn't it from DBT?
Yes, yeah. DBT. From acknowledging and embracing the reality of a situation without judgment or resistance. So accepting things as they are in the present moment and with the recognition that resistance and judgment only increases your distress and hinders solving the problem.
Say that again.
Resistance or judgment often leads to emotional distress and hinders effective problem solving.
Okay. I love that.
So, and it doesn't imply that you passively just resign and this is what it is. I'm not going to do anything.
Nothing I do makes a difference.
Or that you agree or like things. Because when I talk about this in therapy, a lot of people will say, well, I just can't accept that this is the way this situation is. And it's like, it doesn't mean you have to agree with it or like it.
Right.
It just means that you're making a conscious choice to let go of the struggle against reality and to find ways to navigate the challenge with a clear and open mind.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean liking it. It's just accepting that the problem is there.
And it doesn't mean that you agree with it. It's just acknowledging that it exists and where do we go from here?
And a lot of times as humans, we get stuck on being upset about something that is so out of our control that we spend time in that. So whether it's the fact that your child's neurodivergent and you have to address how you feel about that, it's certain behaviors or needs that your child has. We focus on trying to change or shift those when that's out of our control. So what radical acceptance is it's really taking that power back and saying, I know that this situation is what it is, or everything's going to work out how it's meant to, and I'm going to do my best to figure out how I can navigate it now. So like the example you used in our PACE episode with Rory, it's like, I know that she needs extra sleep and that she's wrecked from a day of traveling. And so instead of fighting it or like ignoring it and pushing her to go to this graduation and it will be Meltdown City, I'm going to navigate the challenge, which is like, okay, what can we do here to support her?
Yes.
Why is this important in parenting neurodivergent children? It really is such a powerful tool for like fostering a positive and supportive environment where we accept our children for who they are.
Yeah.
And if you can radically accept situations and needs that your children have, it helps you with the unconditional acceptance and positive regard for your children. And what that means is like we accept them for who they are. We're not trying to change them.
Yeah.
And a lot of like my biggest value in parenting is letting my kids be the little neurodivergent weirdos in the best way that they are, right?
Yeah.
Embrace the quirky.
Yeah.
And
embrace the quirky. That's kind of been my theme this week. It's the quirkiness.
And just let it be there. And if you're able to radically accept your child's feelings and their needs, and then they're not growing up feeling like you're always trying to change them or getting them to mask pretty much.
I think that's really important because in our interview with the authors of Different Thinkers ADHD, we talk specifically about how children hold a level of self-awareness when they're different or when things are different. And that's true of they are aware if we have not accepted who they are. And we love our children, clearly, very much more than anything. And on the same token, you can spend so much time wishing things were different because of your own fears and beliefs around a diagnosis that you aren't fully accepting them. And so then it really is this push and pull for them.
Mm-hmm. And it can be very subtle. Mm-hmm. And usually if you're not able to fully accept them, it's a sign that you need to work on some of your own stuff.
Yeah. Which is hard.
Mm-hmm.
I want to validate that for our audience. That's hard. It's hard to unpack that. It's hard to accept that whatever future you envision for your child might be altered.
There's a lot of grief in it. People don't talk about the grief, and especially like being so neuroaffirming. Like I think it's also normal, and I had a period of grief when I realized that Sam was autistic. Mm-hmm. Because it was like I did not envision these challenges, and I thought of having to do all the hard stuff. Mm-hmm. Like specifically middle school. I don't know why middle school. But kids are mean, and if kids make fun of him, and what's that going to be like for him, and how am I going to parent this, and what's his life going to look like? Is he going to be happy? And you really have to like sit with that and work through it and grieve the expectations that you had for your child. It doesn't mean you love your child any less, but in order to fully accept who they are, you have to grieve that or you cannot move forward.
Yeah, and I'd say that's the same. Like if your child identifies differently via sexuality or gender identity also, you know, like anytime I think when we have children, we have this preconceived notion of what we believe and think and hope for them because of our love. And the reality is they come into this world as a whole human in their own personalities, with their own neurowiring, with their own like identity. And we have to get to know that and be open to what that is. And that can be really challenging, especially if you have a lot of your own preconceived beliefs and notions.
Reading The Conscious Parent really helped me with this. Definitely check that out because it talks a lot about like how we place our own expectations on our children. Parents practicing radical acceptance acknowledge that neurodiversity is a natural variation of the human experience and each child's journey is unique. So the first step to being neuroaffirming is having radical acceptance that neurodiversity exists and we're all, you know, tell us your favorite quote from about the ecosystem.
Oh, so neurodiversity is to humankind like biodiversity is to the ecosystem.
Yeah. And getting there involves letting go of preconceived notions or societal expectations about what normal or typical development looks like and celebrating your child for who they are and where they are at right now.
Yeah.
And so this shift can help you so much come from a place of understanding and compassion when you're parenting your child. And it also can help you move past the shoulds and the Aunt Karens and everyone who has an opinion about your parenting. And it will help allow you to adjust your parenting to what works best for your family rather than falling into like pressure from people around you.
Yeah. I really like that. Because once you accept things for how they are, I feel like you actually fall into this almost like the driver's seat of what your experience gets to be like.
Mm-hmm. And you can adjust so like if you're accepting like that, that neurodiversity is a thing that my child experience is unique and that's okay. And now I can structure my family and life in that way rather than continually trying to like do the shoulds.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so now we're going to go into tips and strategies for like working towards radical acceptance. The first starts with like a lot of self-awareness, and we've talked about this, read The Conscious Parent, but also
it will be in the show notes.
Yes.
I will put the title and the author of The Conscious Parent. It's called The Conscious Parent, Transforming Ourselves and Empowering Children.
How did you remember that?
I looked it up.
Oh, okay.
Don't worry.
Dang.
Can't pronounce the author's name, but it will be in the show notes. So that way you guys can reference it. And I noticed that it was on Audible, so.
It is good. It's a good one. So starting with self-awareness and how your own lived experience, upbringing, preconceived notion, and then also your own like biases and assumptions about neurodiversity are impacting your parenting. And this is a hard journey to go on.
Yeah. Can you unpack some of that with your experience with Sam?
Okay, so let's talk about stimming.
Okay.
Part of how I was trained based on like the timeline of when I went to school, and I mean I think a lot of therapists are still trained this way, is like the goal is to condition stimming out of children, right? Mm-hmm. But there's also a stigma associated with kids stimming in public, that they're weird or different or a distraction or making weird movements or sounds. And so for me, I really had to unpack that, like, my fear of what other people thought of my child stimming in public. So once I learned that, like, it actually wasn't best, because I was always told it's best to do that. Like, that's what you should do. And then once I was like, that doesn't feel right to me. It never felt right, but, like, I was told that's what was best. So you're going to do what you think is best for your kid.
Yeah, what you're taught is evidence-based best practice.
Yeah. And so the more I dove into it and realized that it's regulating, it's serving a purpose, the less I would like. And I've never tried to stop stimming at home simply because I'm made for low demand parenting. I don't have the fucking energy.
Yeah.
But like in public.
Neurodivergent parents.
Yeah. It would be like, oh, maybe I need to like do something about this. But then I realized that, like, once I realized it was regulating, then we would be in public and I would be consciously allowing him to stim when he was stimming without, like, saying anything or trying to redirect as long as it's not dangerous. And I realized I would have the fear of, like, judgment because I'm not doing anything about it. And so I had to unpack that for myself and say that, like, my own biases about, like, neurodiversity, if I'm truly neuroaffirming and truly accepting my child for who they are, it needs to be in every realm, aspect, and situation of life.
That's true.
And
that's
my internal reaction to this feeling of, like, shame about it, well, one, I felt shame about feeling shame about my son, which is a normal reaction, right? Yes. But then my own internal reaction in this situation is about me.
Yeah.
And about the fact that I either truly don't, at my core, I have not accepted that all brains are different and it's okay, or I have some work to do with, like, people's perception of me.
Yeah. Yes. And I would say that is really interesting because I think that's a big part of mine is the parenting perception. Mm-hmm. So, like, with my children and their neurodivergence, it flares up in a lot of different ways. Mm-hmm. One of the things I had a lot of grief around was if we weren't being specifically meeting Rory's needs, then, she was not the child I know because she was tired and she was overly emotional, and sometimes she'd be really physically, like, aggressive, and she would be mad and like having lots of tantrums and meltdowns, right? And so I had a lot of grief around the idea that she couldn't just do the things that my other children did, and because of that, the people I cared about don't get to know who she really is. Like, they don't get to see her for who she is. And I had a fear around like how they judged her as a child. And I had voiced that. Like, I felt really sad that I felt like a lot of my family members didn't really get the chance to get to know her and how great she is, because the circumstances that brought us all together were often ones that were so high demand. She left her dysregulated constantly. And so it was like I really had to find a way to accept and grieve that they aren't going to get to know her, because I'm going to start removing us from those high demand, like, family expectations.
Well, and I think there's grief, and we'll talk a little bit later about this, but in that, like, the people who care to get to know your child will make an effort to truly get to know your child.
Right, and it wouldn't just be... And then I would get comments all the time that they were joking, because she always looked very stoic and, like, wouldn't smile as a baby even. Like, 9 months in, she would just, like, scowl and be very stoic and very observant. And because she was exhausted. And she didn't want anyone to touch her that wasn't me. Like, it was a very... Like, she's always been this way. And so they would make comments about, like, how she's actually probably a serial killer. And, like...
No.
Jokingly, but still, like, it... In some ways, it hurt my feelings that this is, like, the ongoing belief. And I didn't want her to eventually internalize that label that there was something wrong with her because she, like, couldn't hang in these high demand environments.
It's a lot. Parenting's a lot, man.
It is. Well, and then I have my other child who's ADHD, and, like, that executive piece of forgetting things and the parenting shame around how I must not be caring for her properly because there are these things. So it's like, if she forgot something that she needed for school, then there was a lot of parenting shame around how, oh, she didn't have her coat today, so, like, you need to make sure that she brings her coat. And I was like, well, I reminded her, and we have a routine, and she still forgot it. And it was like, or she would forget stuff on the bus. Or now it's homework, right? Like, forgetting to bring home homework or taking homework back to school, or even forgetting to eat in the mornings. I shared that one in a previous episode, where it's like there's a lot of stigma around how, like, I'm not caring for her properly because her neurodivergence is showing up in these different ways.
When
it's not the case.
It's not the case at all. Okay. Incorporate mindfulness practices to stay present in interactions with your neurodivergent child. So if you're having a situation that feels like especially emotionally triggering, I think, like, PACE is a good one, but also just, like, being mindful and then focusing on the strengths and using, like, positive affirmations. And so sometimes I think it's so cool because neurodivergent children really do have, like, certain superpowers. So when you see that, like, really savoring that and calling that out can help you see that, like, it really is just being wired differently and thinking differently. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, and being able to create that neuro-affirming environment in your home. So how can we create the environment in our home for our kids to feel more successful, or for their superpowers to be more readily used and identified and celebrated?
Yes, and helping them, like, hone in their superpower, I feel like. Specifically, like, special interest, like, if there's something there, helping them hone in on that or focus on that.
Yes. Okay, there was a Pete the Cat book that Rory wanted me to read on repeat. Yes. I love Pete the Cat.
Me too.
Okay. So Pete the Cat had a friend at school who the teacher believed struggled in math and wouldn't ever finish their math and always had to take their math home, but then wouldn't bring it back. And so Pete the Cat noticed that every day during math time, his friend was playing with Hot Wheels.
I love it.
Instead of doing his math or understanding his math. So Pete the Cat and his friend hung out, and then Pete the Cat decided to use his friend's Hot Wheels to help teach him subtraction and addition. And then the end of the story is that his friend aced all of his math stuff and didn't have a problem with it anymore. But it was like the incorporation of this special interest.
Yes. I love Pete the Cat.
I was like, this is just such a good lesson for us neurodivergent families.
Yeah. Like, find their thing and use that and help them hone in on or explore their interests.
Well, and with the mindful practices, I think a lot of parents think we're talking like, oh, take deep breaths, do yoga, which yes, we incorporate all of those things. But I'm going to take it back to season 3 when we talk about the metaphor of the house and how your toolbox is all different tools to help you build a house, right? And so when I think about like how we can create a neuroaffirming environment for mindfulness practice, like one of my go-tos for my children, we talked about in a previous episode, is water, bath bombs, right? Like those strong scents that they get to choose, or those novelty experiences. So it's like a warm bath is very regulating, like mindfulness practice for them, involving the sensory system for grounding. And then sometimes they need a little extra encouragement for something like that, where it's like not just the warm water. So then we incorporate like the bath bomb, and they get to pick what smell they want. And sometimes if I'm feeling fancy, I get the surprise bath bombs for the novelty aspect.
The toy inside. Yeah.
But like that's a really good piece there. Or one of my other kids really thrives, like we talked about how this wasn't safe, but while they walked home from the school bus and I was driving home from work, there's usually like a 10 or 15 minute window where they're home alone. Well, and my oldest decided to make scrambled eggs for the neighbor, who's an elderly woman that lives next door.
Cute.
So when she was really dysregulated, I was like, let's use that strength of learning to cook in that level of like drive for independence. And I was like, why don't you make us breakfast this morning? And like handing that back to her. So then she was like making turkey bacon, and I could see that it was helping her regulate, like those types of things.
Yeah. So incorporating mindfulness, how do you incorporate it for you in the moment?
So when I'm driving is a specific example that comes to mind, because oftentimes it's like, we're very dysregulated when we get in the car after childcare and work. And so I do a lot of patterned breathing before I'm like losing my mind. When I'm at home, I will wear my Beats headphones, like the noise canceling ones.
Same.
And either watch a show or listen to a podcast or something, because I need some transition period. So for me, that's some of it. And then I've also noticed if I could take a hot shower right when I get home from work, it makes a big difference in my ability to regulate and transition faster, but that's not always a possibility. So I also incorporate that, and I'm a big smell girl, and I've shared this before, my shirtless fireman dream. And so I have peach scented hand cream that I use intentionally. And then I even do it at work. So like I have a big fluffy blanket at work where in the afternoons when I'm starting to feel tired and taxed, I use this big fluffy blanket to help me make it through some of those sessions, like stay regulated and present. And then I also save a cup of coffee, like a warm cup of coffee for the afternoon, either my afternoon session. So when I'm saying afternoon, I'm talking like between 1:30 and 3:30, or I have that at home. And both of those things to me are very regulating.
Yeah, so incorporating these. So like mine is like a Diet Coke, because it's like the experience. It's the bubbles. It's the spicy Diet Coke burning your throat. The whole thing.
Somebody on our social media was like, I have an emotional addiction to coffee. It's not even the caffeine.
Yeah. And this is how I am with Diet Coke. It is
how I am with
literally emotional. And so sometimes for me, it's like, okay, things are getting tense and I need to like be more mindful. So I'm going to pop open a Diet Coke, take the first sip, which is the best one, take a deep breath, and then that's my like piece of mindfulness to move forward.
I also love giving the kids all their own space. Like they don't always know that that's what they need, but like I use the first 30 minutes a minimum at home for like unstructured time, and that it can include screens. And they each like take a corner, or like Yuri loves to be wrapped in a blanket on the recliner and watch baking shows, and Rory likes to be in the beanbag in the playroom. Like those kinds of like stimulating, right, is kind of the
like
word.
Sensory cocoon.
Yeah, they're sensory cocooning, which is a really grounding practice.
Those are all great tips. Try those all at home, guys. Let's see. Oh, emphasize the power of education. So learning more about your child's specific neurodivergent stuff, right? Like their unique needs. And so that you can better understand their needs, it really helps you come to a place of radical acceptance. Because if you understand that like these are their sensory needs and this is why they have those sensory needs, then you can like be more empathetic and supportive and like fully accept that this is your child the way that they are. The other flip side of this is like taking like active imagining of what it's like to be in your child's experience.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. That would be a really powerful visualization.
So like what it's like for your child to maybe go through their day or to go through like those tricky situations that are difficult for them. And that can help point you to their needs and maybe what they need more of in those different situations.
Yeah, I really like that. I also think emphasizing the power of education for your children about their needs is really powerful. We talk about this specifically in the interview with the authors of Different Thinkers ADHD.
Yes.
So go back and listen to that.
Yes. And then the other's like active listening. So like really listening, getting curious, and trying to understand your child's experience from their perspective really helps you build that sense of like empathy and understanding about what life is like for them and how you can support them.
Yeah.
The next thing I wanted to talk about was like navigating societal expectations from a place of radical acceptance, because there's a lot about this with like parenting and specifically parenting neurodivergent children. So the first tip, and I love this one, and I do this, is educate your immediate social circles about neurodiversity to foster understanding and support. So people that my kids are around a lot know a lot about how I parent, why I parent that way, and like how my children's brain works. So I will say, Ava's brain works this way. Sam's brain works this way. So like kind of explaining it, especially like childcare providers, teachers, extended family, things like that. And I think this helps them understand why you're parenting the way they are, and can help you avoid unsolicited, like well-meaning feedback.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a difference between like well-meaning feedback and criticism and like genuine like curiosity. If you're interested, there's some scripts in the back of like the Low Demand Parenting book that are super good for like how to address someone you literally don't care about when they question your parenting, how to address like a close friend or family, how to address like a teacher or a coach, and like how to explain your parenting style and how your child's unique needs. And this is like an ongoing continual thing that I think is super helpful and has been super helpful for me, because my immediate social circle does not question my parenting ever. Partially because anyone who does question my parenting is out of my social circle immediately.
Yeah.
But the other part is that like they make a genuine effort to understand my children.
Yeah, I love that.
And so I think it can be helpful for them. Set clear boundaries with external pressures. So this is the thing, like for me, if you're going to question my parenting or like be unhealthy to my children, you're just not in my life.
Yes.
And that doesn't have to be the immediate like boundary, but there can be boundaries with like how often we see people, how we interact with them,
how long we interact
with
and
them,
what environment we create.
Yes.
Yeah.
So setting those boundaries in a way that works for you and your family is a way of, one, practicing radical acceptance, but two, helping support like a neuroaffirming environment for your child and helping you really get into a place of radical acceptance.
And I often tell people that when we initially are learning to set boundaries in new areas, they can be really firm. So it can really be like, we don't spend time with that person at all. And then as we become accustomed to what that boundary looks like, it allows for some flexibility. But it's okay to start firm and then get flexible. Like boundaries are allowed to shift and adapt as we do.
And then, so another boundary that's not necessarily with a person, but that I hold is that we don't do more than one activity in a day usually.
Yes.
And there are like weird exceptions. Like on Friday, one of my girls wanted to go to a birthday party before we went to a basketball game. So she was able to do that. She's also the one where her needs aren't, she's not the one that needs as much downtime. So it was like, okay, I feel like this situation would be helpful. Ava didn't want to go. So it like worked out, and I was like, fine, you stay with me, your sister can go to the party, and then we'll all go to the basketball game together. But as far as like weekends go, I just know Sam especially needs a lot of home time and downtime. He does not like leaving the house during his rest time. And so really, for me, it's like one big activity a day or a weekend, with a few exceptions, that like the situations that aren't as dysregulating. And really holding myself to that boundary has helped me radically accept like who he is and how and his needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. We have something very similar. And like right now, I have the kids in a couple activities because they accidentally overlapped. And I was like, this is going to be a really rough couple weeks. So then I accepted that those overlap periods are probably going to be rough, and then like created a plan on how we can navigate that.
Yes. And we have certain evenings that are rough in our house because of like later activities. And so I've had to do that with that. Like I can't, like I intentionally set the gymnastics time where it was, and then they moved the class. So it's like there's not a lot I can do about that. Yeah. And so it's just like accepting that this is what it is and how can we adjust.
Yeah. And that is great modeling of flexibility, because I don't think with neurodivergence we need to have as much rigidity. Like our children don't need to be taught rigidity within neurodivergence to feel like that's what they need to meet their needs, because that is not realistic for society, like as humans in this world.
Yeah, because things are going to change and going to be out of
We will need to adapt. So being able to model what that looks like, and then having the acceptance of the things you need to support the adaptation.
Yes.
Like if there's a last minute change for something, it's okay to be late to that thing. To know that you need to take the time to adjust, that it's going to be different.
And it's also okay to like not go. Yeah. Like if it's too far and it's not going to be doable, like it's okay to not do things.
Yes.
And that's something I think people struggle with a lot.
Yeah. Even if you've paid for it, even if you've committed, it is okay to not do the thing.
To take a break.
Yeah.
It's okay to take a break. The very last thing... Oh, no, my notes went away. Well, stay tuned for the very last thing. It's like community. I had like nice words written down. But it's finding a support system that also practices like radical acceptance or a neuro-affirming approach with your children. And so this can be like us. It can be friends, family, support groups, communities. Online is a great place for this because especially if you don't have this in your day-to-day life, like our community is amazing. Yeah. And supportive of each other. And I love that. And there's also like other groups and things like that.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff for parents, but also for kids. Like I can't tell you how many times I've had autistic individuals share with me how meaningful it is that they have other autistic friends in their online community. And of course, there's a lot of safeguards around like internet safety, right? But like Minecraft specifically has like a whole server just for autistic individuals to find other autistic individuals.
I did not know this. I love this.
Yeah. And then they also do that with like Discord. They'll have specific servers specifically for autistic people that are interested in like Dungeons and Dragons to be able to interact and be able to like facilitate those relationships and that sense of community. So I think that there's a lot of ways we can do this, and it takes some creativity and again, like, of course, parental safeguards, but we have ways where we can create this sense of community to really help our kids flourish.
Yes. And so like creating that sense of community for them is super important, but then also creating that sense of community for yourself. Yeah. And a lot of it, I think, is finding parents who believe and understand and parent in a similar way to you. And it's hard.
Yeah. And oftentimes it's because they have neurodivergent children and they're clued in. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I have an example of that in my life where, like, actually, it's funny because it runs in the family, right? So, the kids' cousins are around the same age. They're only like, Rory's only like 6 months older than her cousin, and they are very similar in presentation when it comes to like their need for sleep, their need for like specific environments, how they respond in like high demand scenarios, like some of their difficulties. And so really like leaning in, that mom and I have really been able to lean into each other to just kind of like talk about some of the experiences that we have, and even like coordinate get-togethers that are neuroaffirming.
Yeah. And that if you're in a public situation or at like a family party and there's a meltdown, like there's not a huge reaction to it, because that's part of the...
Yeah, there's no judgment.
Yeah.
Where like one time, last spring break, I took my kids on a trip to see some of their family, and where they had us staying was like a loft, but the loft obviously was open. So then when it was time to sleep, Rory could see all the lights, she could hear all the noise and the people, and she ended up...
Oh my God. A cricket just jumped on me. It's a Mormon cricket, and I didn't even know they existed. I cannot with this. Okay, keep talking. I'm gonna... Oh my gosh.
All right, we're back. We had to manage a cricket situation. But because of that, she didn't sleep, even though she was beyond exhausted, like the level of stimulation. And so then the next day that night even, she was like screaming because she was so tired, but also her body wouldn't let her sleep because of the environment. And I got a lot of feedback from a lot of her neurotypical family members. And then at that point I was like, okay, so I feel like this probably isn't a safe environment. So if we come back to visit the specific like family, we will have a different place to stay because the environment doesn't allow for what she needs.
And you have to make those adjustments as parents sometimes, and that's where the radical acceptance piece comes in. Like, it is what it is. Everything's going to work out how it's meant to, and I'm allowed to get in the driver's seat and make adjustments that are needed for my child.
Exactly. Without the shame or judgment of anyone else. So go ahead and check out our show notes for the resources. All 3 different books that were mentioned will be in there, and we'll catch you guys next week.
Thanks for coming to Mindful as a Mother podcast. If you'd like more of us and Mindful as a Mother, you can find Paige at Instagram at Parenting with Paige, and Lindsay at Linz_Adams LCSW. Find us on TikTok, Instagram, and in our Facebook group, Creating Community and Smashing Parental Stigma, Embracing Mindful Motherhood and Positive Parenting. Thanks so much, and see you next time.